Very good morning to everyone here. On behalf of the Bengaluru Poetry Festival, we would like to introduce a session which is the book launch of an anthology of poetry called 40 Under 40. There are 40 poets being represented here who are just under the age of 40. I shall read out a little bit of the concept note, but before that, I would like to invite on stage the participants who will be discussing, the editor of the book, the publisher of the book, and our guest who will be releasing the book. May I invite on stage Hemant Tiwate, the publisher of the book, Nabina Das, the editor of the book, Jennifer Robertson, one of the poets, Samantak Bhadra, one of the poets, and K Satchidanandan, who will be releasing the book. A big hand, please. And because this particular book is special, it deserves a little bit of an introduction. I'll just take 2 minutes because we are already short on time. The idea of collecting memories came to the editors via many routes. The editors are happy, of course, to have eminent poet and critic K Satchidanandan here, who will be providing a perspective on how globalization made inroads into India and how the forms and shapes it has acquired defined our very senses. One cannot put a finger on a particular decade and call it as a defining one, but going through the anthology will speak to an entire generation and beyond about what the editors believe will be a sort of representation of that entire generation. Hence, the collection retains a wide range of diversity in this whole array of impressive young poets and their vibrant perception of the time they have traversed. A mix of very new ones as well as established ones. There are Dalit poets, minority poets, fabulous women poets, as well as mainstream voices of deep artistic care and concern. We have decided to keep one translated poet in this book to bring closer home the reality of minority voices writing in the vernacular, having limited exposure to the English-speaking world. I wish, on behalf of Bengaluru Poetry Festival, a very good launch to this poetry collection. It only reinstates our very vision of poetry and that fresh minds should be heard and spoken of more and more. A big hand to them. Thank you, Satchidanandan, for being with us here. Nabina, I hope you'll take it from here. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Hemant Tiwate, the big good morning. And after the dance, if you have gone back to the old days, olden, golden and whatever days of our past and our Sangeet and everything, please come back to the future. Please come back to the present rather. So, as a publisher of poetry means of all types of poetry of good quality. I'm very happy to present this book, 40 Under 40. Maitri introduced this book, but this book is not about the memories or something like that. The poems in this book are actually speaking in a newer language, and how the virtual reality is now our existence. We are not now living only in the real world, but we also live in the virtual world. And we are all connected through broadbands and digitization and everything, all the aspects. I'm not going to speak about the globalization per se, because everybody knows where we are. So I'm very happy to publish this book, because this book is about the hope of English poetry. People normally say that English poetry, or poetry for that matter, is dying. But it is not dying. There are these 41 poets, plus, who have written something related to globalization, and they have used new images. But there are other poets, and they are not from South Bombay, South Delhi, South Kolkata, this part. They are from Hazaribagh, Kalyan, some Birbhum, and some suburb of Mumbai, Bhandup, that way. So this book is all about hope for good poetry, quality poetry. And may I now request Sachidaji to release this book and speak a few words about the book or poetry in general. Thank you. Please buy this book today. Otherwise, I'm going to increase the price to not reachable. Thank you.
Dear lovers of poetry, I don't want to take much time. I would like Nabina to speak, and also our young poets to read poems. Remember, there was a time when writing in English was considered a treason and a betrayal. And many of the poets even wrote poetry defending their choice of English. And one of them was Kamala Das, who actually broke new grounds in Indian English poetry, who asked, why not let me speak in any language I like? The language I speak becomes mine. Its distortions, its queernesses, all mine, mine alone. It is half English, half Indian, funny perhaps, but it is honest. It is as human as I am human. Don't you see? This is from one of her most well-known poems, an introduction. Indian poetry in English has come a long way from Kamala Das, and of course, right from Sarojini Naidu and Thorudutt, whose rhetoric was in some sense negated by the next generation of poets whom I consider the real pioneers of Indian English poetry, like Adil Jassawala, Nissim Ezekiel, A.K. Ramanujan. There's a whole generation of poets, including Kamala Das and maybe Arvind Mehrotra. From there, then you had a second generation of poets, many of whom were women, including Eunice and Charmaine D'Souza and Mina Alexander and quite a few of them. And now this particular anthology represents, as Hemant has made it clear, the future in some sense of Indian English poetry. And going through the poems of the anthology, I have no doubt that that future is definitely not bleak. Because here we have different kinds of poetry. We have what has been called the post-globalization poetry, or I would also say a post-utopian poetry, because we are living in a kind of post-utopian present, and a lot of poems deal with the dystopia rather than the utopia that we all seem to share at one point of time. And and there are Dalit poets, there are feminist poets, there are various kinds of voices, and there is a kind of beautiful polyphony about the entire anthology. And the range and the variety of poetry I could read here were quite astonishing. And generally what, so-called senior poets like me look for in young poets is first an element of freshness, freedom from cliche, being fresh. Second, an element of surprise, which comes from the image and the very structure and the tone of poetry. And from those points of view, I find quite a few of these poems extremely interesting. I also, when I get a poem by a young poet, the first lines I look at are not the beginning, but the last two lines. And if you have a mastery of the last lines, you know there is promise. I'm not saying that all those poems should be great, but definitely there is promise, because what are the great tricks, or what are the great tricks of the trade that the poet should know is the punchline, the ending of poetry. Well, I have marked quite a lot of such wonderful endings of poems here, which I don't have time to read. What I will just do is to read out this short opening poem, which I believe is the beginning of a beginning. It's a poem by Aditi Rao, and with that I close. If you ask me for memories, I would offer you a few, preserved in brine and vinegar, polished into black and white prints, 3 by 5, easily framed, tadpoles, an irrelevant well, a crescent of watermelon, frozen bath in hungry river, a ghost afraid of child's pee. I wouldn't include this gentle soup, this scribbled stone trampoline, this need for colorful teacups. I would forget this child burning garbage to warm me, this mule who knows to leave the cricket pitch, this incessant bird song filling vacant inches of my lungs. If you asked, I would offer you this air against diaphragm fullness, this turning to salt, this return. Thank you poets, and thank you Hemandan.
Thank you, Sadam. Sorry, he's K Satchidanandan. I'm so privileged to have him speak a few words on our anthology. I'm the co-editor, the other person being Semeen Ali, who I give full credit to. She's a Delhi-based poet who's not present here at the moment. Semeen did a whole lot of work together with me, but I'm a lazy person, so she actually did the hard work. And I'm really happy to present this book. And as Hemant said, please do get it, because this is what young India is writing. And a lot of us are not very young that way, but this is 18 to 40, just about 40 and under poets speaking their own voices out. And as Hemant has pointed out, there are people from the backwaters, small towns, aspiration-driven people who have taken up writing, and not because it's fashionable to write in English or there is an onus, but there is just a compulsion to speak your own voice. So just to make things short, I'd just say post-globalization, because I found these poets who are born mostly very late 70s or 80s and 90s, they have a particular perspective of the world which has been running in front of them like a film screen, and whether we are talking in Twitter today or in WhatsApp, they've been here slightly before that. I mean, there are memories of letter writing, memories of sleeping under the open sky, and then coming from small town to big town. We spoke about migration with another poet in the morning. So all this adds up to the memory. And I was asked a question somewhere, is this memory or nostalgia? I can say maybe both, but I like the word memory better, because nostalgia to me is more like a hankering and pining and whining. But memory, as Sachida has just sort of read out in this poem by Aditi Rao, is a stronger driving force that takes you forward. So, and we have two Dalit poets who are making their mark in English writing in India. One of them is bilingual. Her name is Aruna. She is in this book. She writes in Telugu and in English, which is completely her own diction, and I would invite you to find it out for yourself. And Chandramohan is there. There is another poet who is in translation, only one. We didn't want to do tokenism, but we realized our space was limited, and this was a first venture as an editor. I was pretty nervous, but thanks to Poetry Wala, thanks to a lot of mentors and supporters that I have had the luck of gaining on my way to becoming a poet myself and writing and editing, and the poets we have included. So I'm going to stop talking here and hand over the mic to maybe Shamantak first. You want to go first? Yeah? And then we'll come to Jennifer. These are the two poets we have right now. So read from there, and then I would invite you to ask questions to them as to why they wrote, what they felt. Thank you very much for coming here.
It's very tough to actually say anything after Sachida sir says something, after Nabina says something, and then you come and actually have to perform your poetry. It's a very tough ask. Anyway, without further ado, the first poem that I'm going to read out is called Tendons That Do Not Tear. It's mostly an experimentation in post-memory, where you hear and hear and hear stories, so much so that eventually there is a sort of a transgenerational transmission of traumatic experiences, you might call it, or stories that you've heard for so long that it kind of seeps into your genes and it kind of becomes your memory in a way. So in a way, this is that poem. It's a poem that kind of speaks about it. I get unborn and develop 2 feet that walk into the wet foundation of a now home, away from everything, static, safe, away from them, away from our then home, suspended between sketches and reality. It exists, slightly broken perhaps, inconsequential cobwebby homes, finding a sense of static in cracked walls. I imagine unborn and present in front of the door of the then home by itself in the center of the cosmic nothingness, while the rest of the then now homes grows, sighing occasionally, but moving on. The now homes on the left and on the right gradually constrict themselves, shunning away from the empty boringness of this then home of East Pakistan. Now home is the foreign mud of Dinajpur, where feet dig into and create memories that stretch tendons of then memories into a now home, a static epitaph of a fading skin. A complete new existence, living, breathing, heaving, stretching across with full force to eke out the remnant wrinkles of a greeny picture, bits of which I desperately cling to, pasting them deep into the mud of the now home, hoping they would grow the same old roots, so that if anybody asks, I can tell them that I have not lost touch with who I am. Thank you. And the second poem for today, it's also a bit on the similar lines, but it's not quite so, because it's kind of derived from a talk I heard. It's by Pico Iyer. It's called Where is Home? He tries to explain where home is and is not able to say anything about it eventually. So it's called The Mime Called Time. The leaves fall and wither, pages turn monotonously, the calendar falls off the wall. I am the witness, stranger. There are no random bursts, there is only consistent loss. The eyes are stones. I have felt it, stranger. The skin peels off slowly, virility, a dying flame. The mind is a rusted nail. I mourn you, stranger. Grey is your house now, the paint is thus extinct. The creepers are free. I reside there, stranger. A calm fire is burning, smoke hiding every tear. Devouring that armchair, I know of it, stranger. Memories without color and an indefinite abyss, inevitable and acceptable, but not your fault, stranger. Incessant hands of the clock, the wind pays no heed, blowing away the dust. You understand, stranger? Light up your eyes, the wheels stop therefore, sunlight in the room, you may smile, stranger. Every drop of time, precious bead in a necklace, silent message when conveyed. I am a mime, stranger. Thank you.
I invite Jennifer to read and do ask Shamantak what he means about home and stranger.
The purpose of art, according to Shklovsky, is to force us to notice things. Since perception is usually too automatic. Yeah. Is it better now? Okay. Since perception is usually too automatic, we develop a variety of techniques to impede that reaction. So what are we doing currently to make the quotidian strange, to make the ordinary infraordinary? How has the metaphor changed for all of us who live in a world of smartphones and iPad, and how do we navigate that distance between the personal and the private? The first poem is not included in this anthology, but it will give you a fair idea of how the metaphors are evolving. It's called The Assortment of Wikipedia Lines. This is a critique, a lament for the loss of letter writing, the loss of the epistolary. We are constantly navigating multiple screens. It is meant to be a letter to my father, talking about abuse, something that I haven't been able to do that at all. And yet when I wrote this poem, it was important for me to have that emotional distance. So you will see it's a work of bricolage where I've interweaved Wikipedia first lines and my own personal thoughts. The assortment of Wikipedia lines. Human whistling is the production of sound by means of continually controlling a stream of air. For instance, my dad in the year 1985 could impeccably whistle the Beatles song, I Want to Hold Your Hand. When I became older, and by older, I mean old enough to legally drink, I tried whistling that song. It was in Martin's Corner, Goa. I couldn't. People thought I was plastered. Lambretta is a line of motor scooters originally manufactured in Milan. Lambretta was my dad's first scooter. In the year 1987, I was riding pillion and my dad was saying something. His voice was incoherent. I remember putting my back against his, I remember putting my ears against his back. His voice remained muffled. Reverberation is a collection of reflected sounds from the surfaces in an enclosure like an auditorium. Sometimes the noise gets blurred and patchy like old snaps. But if you put your ear against the right wall, you can see noise. That Lamby was white and blue. Ben-Hur is a 1959 American epic historical drama film directed by William Wyler. This was the movie that was showing when my dad left me at an uncle's place. Charlton Heston's face is synonymous with the way people fashion their exits, stone cold and chiseled. Gray's Anatomy is an English language human anatomy textbook, originally written by Henry Gray. My dad taught anatomy all his life. All my life, I thought his favorite word was mandible. In invertebrates, the mandle is a lower jaw and a jawbone connecting the cranium. Verb, touch. Third person singular, simple present touch. Present participle, touches. Past tense, touched. Past participle, touched. Gerund or present participle, touching, an act of touching someone. In the year 1987, I was riding pillion and my dad was saying something. His voice was incoherent. I put my ears against his back. His voice remained muffled, but the volume got amplified. There are 3 different kinds of recalls: past recall, serial recall, and free recall. It's 2016. I try to whistle a song and people think I'm plastered.
So I think I have been shown the placard of 5 minutes before 3 minutes. So we have 2 minutes. So we can take one question, or maybe half will do. If you don't have question, okay, there is a question. I don't know, I will be able to answer this question, so Jennifer will answer the question, but I think everything is original. The noise too. And that whatever we experience is part of the art. Maybe it's some memory from somewhere, like somebody uses dialogue and okay. From somewhere you already...
I'll let Jennifer answer it about memory.
Thing that plagues most people who are writing currently. I think all of us have a personal idiom in terms of how we express ourselves. Most of what we write will ultimately be an amalgam of whatever we've read, consumed, assimilated. So I would like to say this on behalf of my own writing. Don't be proud of whatever you're writing. Don't be shy about it. Don't be diffident about it. It's coming from a place which you've assimilated and internalized. So if that is your space from where you're operating from, I think it's perfectly all right. It's original enough. And if you're finding a way in which you're expressing it differently, the same material, because almost everything is done, right? So you don't have to worry about it. Just find an expression that is true to you, it's true to your voice. It might take some time to get there, but don't be afraid, okay? That's all I'm going to say.
Just one line here. I mean, when you say noise, how do you define noise? I mean, noise can be unique across different periods of time. Even if you talk about noise, that noise you talk about is your noise. It's not my noise. It's not Sachida's noise. It could be anybody's noise. Even noise is original. So.
Can I add one more line? Yeah, speaking of noise, and so when I mentioned Aruna Gagula Manda from Hyderabad, the Dalit poet, she speaks about silencing of women's bodies and women's. We just watched Andal's lecture and saw the dance and heard the lecture. So just to voice and to be silenced, noise is there also in being silenced. So I don't know, I mean, this is a very valid question, but I think we all have different answers. And I would urge you to read more and then probably come back with more questions. Any other question? Last question. Yeah.
I'm not under 40, but this is an appeal to those under 40. You had a chip once when you were young, and you wore it on your shoulder and thought it was fun. But it left you when it was done, and it let you be your very own one. Today you have another chip, one that doesn't leave you even if you are done. Instead it takes with it what you have done and doesn't let you be your very own one. Be weary of it, you young ones, for you do not know when it is undone what you have done. This is the plea.
I think we should end with that.
So that is done.
Thank you very much. And please buy all the Poetry Wala books so that Atta Galatta will ask us for more and we'll be able to publish more books. We are reaching 100 books now in 17-18 and we want to actually go ahead. I want to retire as a poet publisher and not as a marketing person. Thank you very much.